Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Monday, June 16th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with Times of Israel founding editor David Horovitz. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Jessica.
Hi there. It is day 619 of the war. 8 people were killed and hundreds hurt in the overnight Iranian missile strikes on central Israel and Haifa. Meanwhile, Israel on Sunday killed Iranian intelligence chiefs striking deep inside Iran, opening what it termed a, quote, air corridor to Tehran. We'll talk about the latest strikes, how Israelis are faring, both in Israel and those who are stuck abroad. We'll talk about the goals of the war, coordination with the U.S., and where we are in all of this. So stay with us.
The law basically assumes that the enemy force you are fighting may not care about your civilians, but it certainly cares about its own civilians. What do we do in a reality where you're dealing with an enemy that the suffering of their civilian population is inherent to their war strategy? Now, that doesn't absolve us of our obligations. Hamas's inhumanity does not absolve us of the obligation for humanity. But the context that it creates, I think, is critical to the conversation, and it's very lacking.
I agree, but when democracies fight back against terror groups, they have to fight on two fronts. They have to both fight on the terms that have been laid out by the terror group, and the second thing you have to fight back is by preserving the norms of a democracy. We're forced to ask these moral questions about what we are and what we do, but based on an enemy that is not playing by the rules. But that's what we decide to be a part of by being the family of nations. And as Jews, we say, like every morning in our prayers, we say, Anachnu amcha b'nei britecha. We choose to be the people of God's covenant, meaning we tie ourselves to an aspiration of justice and righteousness.
Okay. David, let's start with where we are this morning. Strikes overnight. Israelis, of course, running to shelters and to safe rooms, trying to figure out what is actually safe as people get up in the morning or don't go to sleep and find out how many were killed, how many were wounded. And it's now playing out on a daily basis, and does not look like any end is in sight.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, we'll come on to what Israel is doing in Iran and against the nuclear and military sites and key personnel in a second. But indeed, I mean, yesterday we also had, relatively speaking, I suppose you'd say, a minor daytime barrage, but evenings and overnights in Israel in the days since the start of this operation are punctuated by missile strikes, and there's a whole process where Israelis are told, you know, we've detected a launch, or we're detecting an imminent launch in Iran. The intelligence is obviously, you know, extraordinary, as we also see in the offensive strikes. And so Israelis are told to stay close to bomb shelters and or reinforced rooms in your homes. And for example, last night, from I don't remember exactly what time it was, but overnight in the very, very early hours of the morning, not long after midnight, the country was told basically stay close to your protected areas because we've detected a launch or an imminent launch. It wasn't completely clear. And then long, I would estimate, I mean, certainly more than an hour and a half, maybe longer, in fact, almost certainly longer. Israel, people waited. They were told, you can be. I'm sure a lot of people went to bed, but be somewhere where you know where you're going to go if the sirens sound and if this alert is raised higher. And there was some premature confidence, I would say, because Israel at the same time was striking missile launchers in Iran. That's the bottleneck, if you like. Iran has thousands of ballistic missiles, but probably hundreds of launchers, and the IDF is clearly trying to take out the launchers, and it's trying to push Iran further back into Iran. I assume that Israel's control and air supremacy, in a conventional sense, is complete. Israel is overflying Tehran all the time, but it's trying to gradually make it harder and harder for Iran to launch and to deprive it of those launchers. And there was a sense, well, maybe we thwarted these launches. And then, of course, came the barrage, the deadly barrage. The death toll at the moment overnight is 8, and complicating the reality for Israelis is that several people, as far as we know, the army is right now, as far as I understand, is the spokesperson is about to speak, and our military correspondent is on a call, and we'll get a clearer sense of what we can learn from the nature of the fatalities. But it seems that some people, at least two, I think, were in a protected area in their building, in their homes, not a bomb shelter, protected areas, when they were killed. A direct hit. For the first time that I can recall, certainly of late, certainly in this conflict, where people had done everything that they were supposed to do, and until this morning, the word from the authorities, the Home Front Command and others, were that nobody had been killed who had taken shelter where they were supposed to, either in a protected room in their home or in a shelter. As of now, as far as we know, that's no longer the case, and the protected rooms are not an absolute panacea when there's a direct strike in certain circumstances and so on. This will all become clear, I think, clearer in the next few hours.
Right, and of course, then what are people supposed to do? I mean, there's already not enough bomb shelters, not enough safe rooms or reinforced rooms, as we call them, and obviously, we'll sort of see how that
Yeah, I
plays
mean,
out.
in the strike yesterday, four women from the same family in Tamra, which is a city near Haifa, were killed in a city which has radically not enough public shelters. You can try and do everything you're supposed to be doing, but you're not going to have somewhere that is safe to take refuge. There are some pretty dramatic statistics in terms of how many people, what percentage of Israelis actually do have access to public bomb shelters. This is something that Israel is going to be addressing. The Home Front Command is going to be addressing. There have to be more maximally protective public shelters made available, and we'll get more sense of that in the coming days as well, I'm sure.
Let's turn to Israel operating strikes in Iran. You were touching on that just now, air supremacy all over Iran, tackling the launchers. What else are we expecting? What are the goals of the war, in a sense? I mean, I guess that's really the question here that we
Yeah,
all
I mean
keep on asking.
Well, there are declared goals of the war, and they are not to bring down the regime, and they are not. Israel has not publicly, and apparently the cabinet did not vote on a goal that said destroy the Iranian nuclear weapons program militarily. I think that's really interesting if you contrast that to Gaza, where destroying Hamas is a declared war goal. We saw Prime Minister Netanyahu in an interview on Fox News yesterday. He may have said it elsewhere as well, talking about the regime may fall because it's a weak regime as a consequence of Israel's military action, but that is not a declared goal. There is assertion and counter-assertion about whether Donald Trump prevented or asked Israel or required Israel not to target Ali Khamenei, the Iranian supreme leader. The national security advisor here, Tzachi Hanegbi, said a couple of days ago, he may have also said it again since, that Israel is not going to be targeting the political leadership of the regime. I'm not certain that that is necessarily going to be the case, but we shall see. Given the nature of Iran's attacks on Israel and the targeting of civilian areas.
Civilians, right? And given the fact that the whole thing led from statements that were made that were clearly not true. In other words, there was a whole week of this playing out, talking about what wasn't going to happen. Then, of course, what did happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting as well. And I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of gray areas between Donald Trump saying we knew everything that was going to happen and Netanyahu saying we're completely coordinated with the United States. It may be that ultimately we and the US have reached complete coordination, but that would presumably require one side saying, well, we want to do this, and the other side saying we really don't want you to, and finding some framework that both sides are comfortable with. And also, indeed, there is clearly a desire not to tell the enemy everything that you may or may not be planning. I mean, just to digress a little bit, the people who are planning this war in Israel knew that lots of Israelis were going on holiday, and we now have figures asserting that something like 200,000 Israelis cannot get home at the moment. Israel could have said to its citizens, hey, don't go abroad because we're going to be starting a war soon and we will probably have to close
You
the
won't be able to
airport.
get back.
Right,
Yeah.
couldn't do that because you'd be telling Iran we're about to attack you. So there's stuff that obviously is very sensibly not completely overt at the moment. But just coming back to the goals of the war, the strategic goal, it seems to me, and this again was explicit from the National Security Advisor, from Tzachi Hanegbi, is that you're going to inflict considerable military damage, and that is what Israel is doing quite remarkably, I would say, targeting some nuclear sites, certainly targeting military sites, targeting some oil and gas infrastructure and depots and so on, killing many commanders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Iranian army. Basically, and as we've said, targeting the ballistic missile program in any way that it can, launchers and storehouses and so on, with the goal that I mean, as Tzachi Hanegbi put it, that the regime decides that it's not in its interest to continue to pursue a nuclear weapons program. And again, while also making sure that its ballistic missiles can no longer pose the kind of threat that they are plainly posing right now. But that's the goal. And Hanegbi cited the Libyan and the South African models. In other words, countries that were closing in on the bomb and were under economic pressure and other pressure, and concluded that their interest was served by abandoning the program. I mean, Donald Trump has said this. He said Iran is not going to get nuclear weapons and it's not going to have enrichment. And there are two ways. I'm paraphrasing him. He said variants of this a few times. There are two ways that this can happen. They can decide to destroy their enrichment and other nuclear facilities, or we can. That's one of the ways that he put it. That was in a podcast last month. But he said similar things, nice ways and nasty ways and so on. And that's the declared goal as set by the National Security Advisor, to create a situation in which, I assume the unsaid part is, the regime concludes that it's going to fall if it doesn't dismantle its entire program, abandon and dismantle. So that's the goal.
And stay with us. We're going to keep on talking about Israel and the U.S. vis-a-vis Iran in just a moment.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life, and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up, and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
We're back from the break, but let's keep on talking about what Israel is actually capable of in this war, what it needs to take out in order to find some kind of victory here.
Well, there are certain sites that Israel has already been striking. We understand with some success. Obviously, things are not definitively clear. But for example, it appears there has been considerable damage inflicted on Iran's Natanz enrichment facility. Certainly, overground parts of it, quite possibly, or even probably, some damage underground. But for example, and there have been reports that Israel has been hitting other sites, including at Parchin and at Fordo. Fordo is probably the most interesting in terms of its relative inaccessibility. To use a bit of understatement there, it's built into a mountainside. It's incredibly hard to penetrate. And I think Israel would probably privately acknowledge that there is a limit to what it can do at Fordo, and it would need the kind of munitions and the kind of capacities that or capabilities that only the United States have. So I'm sure behind the scenes there is, I mean, first of all, on the Israeli side, I'm sure there is a desire to have American active support. Remember, America has been supportive of the war and has helped in the defense. There's an American missile defense system that's active here, but it has not been taking part in attacks. And where Fordo is concerned, I think Israel would feel that if you want to maximize the pressure on Iran to abandon this program, you're going to need America capable and involved as regards trying to put Fordo out of action.
Is that a possibility at all? But what's your sense in terms of the conversations that keep on going?
Yeah, I mean, if you if you try to get some sense from what President Trump has been saying at the moment, that is not something that America is minded to do. He said just a few hours ago, sometimes you just have to fight it out or fight it to the end. I'm paraphrasing. That was in remarks to reporters last night, our time, late last night, our time. He wasn't saying, he was saying, I support Israel. He explicitly said that, but he did not say, and we will be joining the fight with Israel against Iran. So as things stand publicly, that is not where Trump is minded to go. But things can change.
Right. I mean, there's it's helpful when you have another country fighting the battle for you.
Well,
is that fair to say?
No, I mean, broadly, I would say Israel would certainly not say that. Israel's stated
No,
policy.
I meant the reverse. I meant
if you're the
Israel,
United States,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's been a very powerful argument that Netanyahu and others have made. This is Israel tackling Iran on behalf of the free world. Iran's missiles can already hit everywhere in Israel. They're trying to expand their missile range. Iran's considers Israel the little Satan and America the great Satan, and it's building a nuclear weapons program. I think the Trump administration and the president have made clear that they recognize that Iran is a threat far beyond Israel. I think there are some quite striking comments. For example, the leader of the British opposition party, the Conservative Party, has said basically Israel is fighting this war on our behalf. So there is, considerable recognition.
Yeah.
And therefore Israel might reasonably say, well, help us do it. We'll see. What I was going to say is Israel has never asked other countries to help it fight its wars, and really is doing quite extraordinary stuff where the Iranian program is concerned. But it may be as a function of munitions and, I think specifically munitions and the logistics of where you are in the region. I think we can say certainly American offensive involvement would be very helpful. It's not clear at this stage that that's going to happen.
One more topic I always want to touch on before we close this podcast for the day, which is that I've been speaking to hostage parents who, of course, feel silenced in the sense that literally because there's no attention paid to hostages or much even to Gaza right now. And in a very real sense, there's no protests happening. There can be no gatherings. There can be nothing public. They can't go to the Knesset. They can't stand in streets together. They can't rally. And of course, that is very real. That is a very real sense here in Israel that there is very little that is spoken about the hostages and Gaza right now because it is not the main front. And that's extremely painful for these families. But it's also just the reality of they keep on saying, well, why couldn't it have ended in Gaza first before this new front was begun?
Well, that's the 20-month-old conversation that's been
right.
Tearing at Israeli society. Could this have been handled better in Gaza? Could it yet be handled better in Gaza? And we've talked about this so many times, most especially since March, I would say, because there was a deal in place in January that was intended, if it had played out, to see all the hostages released by Hamas and an end to the war. And we've talked again about, I don't think Israel was convinced that Hamas would honor such an accord and give up its leverage. And there was certainly an unwillingness on the part of the government to enter the second and third phases of that deal. It would have helped Israel in terms of international image and support right now, I imagine, if the war in Gaza were over, rather than a situation where in the days before Israel went to, I think you have to say, war against Iran, Israel was coming under tremendous international criticism because it had ceased aid to Gaza and then reinstated it or allowed it via a mechanism that Netanyahu said yesterday for the first time, indeed, Israel had essentially set up, which is proving very difficult to manage. It is able to distribute food. I'm talking about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, but lots of Gazans are being killed in the course of the effort to get to the distribution
Get to
points
them.
and so on, in all kinds of circumstances, in many circumstances where the IDF has acknowledged opening fire because people were coming at it in large numbers outside the prescribed routes
Distribution
and so
points.
on.
Right.
In other cases where Hamas has been killing people, in other cases where it's not clear what's going on. And then, of course, since the war against Iran has begun, you have had the issue relatively marginalized, the issue of the hostages and Gaza generally. I mean, it hasn't gone away, and the prime minister in the first day or so of this series of attacks on Iran wasn't talking about the hostages in these little videos he started making. But in the last day or so, he has talked again about the hostages and his commitment to getting everybody out and so on. It's not completely off the agenda, but it's certainly more marginalized. Again, I just want to, maybe we should end on this. You know, you've got a nation here. The people, the whole country of Israel is watching its army and its air force and the Mossad doing extraordinary things against a regional powerhouse, a country with 10 times as many people, with all kinds of natural resources that Israel lacks, which has used a regime that's used those resources to maximize its capacity to do harm. And Israel's basically brushed aside their air defenses. It is flying over Tehran. It's striking people on the specific floor of an apartment building because they are commanders in a military force, whereas Iran is basically throwing anything it can at Israel and killing as many Israelis as it can.
Right.
You know, this is
Really.
Israel is watching incredible achievements, but as we have been in the past, in the Gulf War in 1991, and too many times since, we're under rocket attack and missile attack, and the nation as a whole is really I mean, during the day less so, although gatherings are banned and so on. But overnight now, the norm is becoming alarms, imminent alarms, and deadly rocket strikes. These are powerhouse missiles that Iran is firing. They carry maybe 1 ton warheads. They're the same missiles that were used in April and October last year, but so many of them are being directed or are heading into civilian areas. The same kind of interception successes, above 90%, but that still means that anything up to
Some get through.
are getting through with deadly consequence. And that's, I think, obviously where any nation's populace would be focused right now when they're having to dash to bomb shelters or being told that they're about to every day, and most especially every night.
Yep. Okay. Hoping for, I don't know, some kind of quiet today and finding a way out of this. So,
Well, that's hoping
yeah,
that the success of the military campaign against Iran bears fruit
yes,
in ways
that's
that
for sure.
benefit Israel and everybody else who wants to, carry on living.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, thanks, David. Thanks for being on
Thanks,
today's
Jessica.
Daily Briefing.
Take care.
And thanks to you for listening to the Daily Briefing. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode is produced by the Podwaves with a video edited by Tomas Gersh. Until next time, take care of yourselves and be well.